Hey everyone. I just wanted to pop in this week and be able to record another thought that I had. Um, it's been a little bit. I'm in nursing school right now, and so I had a couple of exams that I had to study for. So I haven't been posting as frequently as I would like to, but I want to try to make it in here once a week, at least for myself and for anybody else who gets value out of this. So um, I just had this thought that was kind of inspired by different people posting on social media. And after posting my video, I received so many warm and loving responses from everybody, whether in and out of the church. I mentioned that in my last video, which was really wonderful. And it's really nice to see like who's there and who's supportive. Um, there were a lot of people who didn't even comment that I know I know had thoughts about it, but didn't even comment, didn't even give it a thumbs up, didn't give it anything. And it's been, I think it's been about a week at this point, which is fine. People don't have to do that, but it's also really obvious when they share their thoughts outside of your post in their own separate posts. And so I saw one by somebody that I know who was expressing their sadness and grief over seeing so many people leave the church. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, like part of me is trying to give them some grace because I'm like, I used to do the exact same thing. I used to think the exact same thing. It was so sad whenever anybody left. And I used to think more than anything, the hang up that I realized I was on was that, oh my gosh, look at this. This prophecy is being fulfilled. People are apostatizing and it's coming to pass. And that then verified in my mind that the prophet of the church really is the prophet and all the prophets before him um and that was really like my one thing that I when I started thinking about it I was like why do I think this about people um and it really came down to I was just scared into thinking in any other way. And it's interesting because it's interesting when we act out of fear because we literally just we cling even harder to that comfort blanket and to what we know. And so I think I had mentioned in my last video, I'm not sure that I really did anybody any favors by posting my thoughts as far as people in the church, but it was really nice to hear from people who had left who felt validation from that. And that made me feel good that I was able to provide any value for them. Because it was very nerve-wracking. But I just kind of wanted to touch on a couple of things that this person had written. And it's a very lengthy post that I'm not going to read all the way through. But basically, this person starts out by saying it's really painful to watch so many friends and family in our great nation walk away from the church and his gospel. And he says he's sharing the following that he knows to be true, and that the teachings of the gospel, an example of Jesus Christ, offer profound wisdom and guidance and a fulfilling life and meaningful life. I I just had to stop right there for a second because all of that language assumes that everyone else outside of the Mormon church's gospel does not have a fulfilling life, that they don't, or that they don't have full fulfillment. And this is one of the things that I don't love about the Mormon church and the Mormon gospel. It's like, well, we're the true church. It's like it's interesting because in public settings, the members are always like, "Oh no, we just want to add value to the gospel. We just want to add value to Jesus Christ's, teachings in the Bible. We're just adding unto it." And I remember that being a response that I used to give. I was like, oh, that's such a smart way of putting it. But when you think about it, it's actually incredibly sneaky that you would have to find ways to dance around a topic to not offend other people of other faiths just because you think that you are the only true church. Because behind closed doors every Sunday and once a month every month, everybody's getting up and echo chambering and saying the same thing over and over, which is that they know that this is the one and only true church. Well, if you're repeating that and you've been raised in that, and like this person has, and I know that for a fact that they have, um, then your mindset goes into, I have the truth, and you just walked away from that, and now you don't have the truth anymore. And obviously the issue's with you because you're confused. And this is the most fulfilling and rewarding your life would ever get. So, like there, it's like they can't mentally comprehend why anybody would walk away. But it assumes that, like me, as somebody who walked away, that I didn't just walk away from the Mormon church. I also walked away from Jesus Christ, is what this language is assuming, or that anyone who walks away from the Mormon church is walking away from Jesus Christ. And that is not the case at all. Some people do. Some people don't believe in deity anymore. Some people don't believe in the Savior anymore after they walk away. But the thing that I can't stand about this is going back to what I was just saying a few minutes ago, was that continued process of the echo chamber is what instills this into people's minds in the church. And then that language ends up coming out in their writings or in the way that they talk to people, regardless of whether they realize it or not. And so the rest of us are looking at it going, yeah, I don't feel like my life is not fulfilled just because I'm not living the Mormon church's exact doctrine. Like, I have valid reasons. And the thing is that the difference between you and so many others is that I actually do have two perspectives because I've done the research on both sides, and you haven't, because you are committed to being completely and abundantly obedient to a bunch of old men who say, don't look at that other information. And so this is so annoying. It doesn't even begin to express. It's annoying and frustrating because it's like, you're not actually listening to anybody's, explanations then about why they felt bad. Because that's not where your brain goes. Like, you're really not trained into caring about that. It's like, we're trained to care in a Christ-like way as committed members of the church, to be like, oh yeah, I really love you, but you're wrong. And that's really the thought that trumps any other thoughts that you may have, you know, underneath that main one. And it's really the one that most members I find, I, again, like, that used to be me as well. I used to be the one that was like, oh, I feel really bad for them. And now that makes me sick to think that I ever did that and ever felt that, because that's not what those people need. That's not what they needed. They didn't need me to feel bad for them. They just needed to be able to express themselves and finally say, like, I'm never going to get a chance to do this at the pulpit. I'm never going to get a chance to tell anybody in my ward in a setting like that or in any other way that these are my reasons. And the thing is that even if they were to do that, everybody in sitting there in church would, again, just cling even harder to that comfort blanket of what they've always known and what they've always been told is true, what they've always repeated is true because they were always told it was true, and have never looked anywhere else to learn anything else because they've always assumed and have been told and have repeated that the true church is the Mormon church. There is nothing that they compare it to because they think it's uncomparable. But this kind of language, I think, is a bit offensive because other people who read this, who are part of other churches or who even maybe don't believe, like, they're going to look at this and go, you think that I'm immoral now, or that I don't have a fulfilling life because I lack what the Mormon church is offering? Like, you're acting like the Mormon church is is it. And that's the thing, though, is that they do think that it is it. And that's why this kind of these thoughts like come out through the language. They think that they're doing something good. And the funny thing is too, is that it is an echo chamber. So all the people who agree with this aren't going to recognize those those nuances in there, or they're not even that nuanced, but they're not going to recognize that. They're just going to be like, yes, exactly. That's exactly right. So it's really funny to me. But he's saying, the closer we align our lives with the gospel and teachings of Jesus, the more abundant and enriched our lives will become. At the core of the gospel, the message of love and compassion, except that that's not what people who walk away are feeling when you post stuff like this, because it doesn't feel like love. It feels like you're pitying people for making a decision that has been weighing on their minds. Like it presupposes almost an idea that like it wasn't even thought through. Like we were just so deceived or so gullible to buy into whatever it was that was out there that was contradicting the gospel that we just didn't even really think it through. And we're so weak and deceivable and gullible. And that is, I find offensive, because I'm like, no, I was raised in the church. I was that person, just like you, just like so many others raised in the church in this echo chamber. And I did obey and not look at any of the anti information. It's all a political game for the people at the top. They absolutely use political measures to ensure that people remain in the church. And it drives me crazy. It just drives me crazy that people won't recognize this or see this, or they refuse to. And I'm like, don't preach to me and act like my life isn't worth living like yours is anymore. Don't act like you have a more rewarding and fulfilling life than I do. You know nothing. You know nothing about me. You know nothing about my life. You won't even consider my reasons. You're going to just go over all the predetermined responses given to you at church in your head and be like, oh, she has an issue with polygamy. Well, here are all the reasons why it was okay, which I can now debunk like every single one of those if you want to debate me on that. Like, there's nothing okay about it. Like, but anyway, it drives me crazy. It says the gospel encourages forgiveness. Moreover, the gospel encourages forgiveness, reconciliation, offering a pathway to healing and inner peace. By letting go of grudges and resentment. I find that ironic. Um, I'm not saying that this person is like holding grudges against me or anybody for leaving, but it almost seems like there almost is like this pain of like, how could you do this? Where it's like, well, for what, like, all honestly, like, how does it even directly affect you when you think about it? Like me living my life. And the thing is that it goes back to this teaching, and I know where their minds are going because it was the same for me. It goes back to this teaching, like, people like John Dillon have brought this up a lot on their podcast, where it's like they see you as like an empty seat in heaven now. They're like, oh, I'm not ever going to see you again. And the weird thing is that it's astounding how long it took me to realize like how awful that doctrine was, that it divides people like that. It's like if you don't stick with the program, you're not going to make it. And also there's a prophecy anyway that says there's going to be an enormous apostatizing. There's going to be a huge apostasy, and people are going to walk away and leave the church. And um with that, like only like many are called and few are chosen, and so only so many people are going to make it into heaven. And the thing is it's like those people in the church who keep clinging, they're like, it's going to be me. I'm going to make it. But then it's like, okay, well, now you're part of the Heaven VIP club. Now what? Now what? You forget about everybody that you cared about. Like, and I think that's one of the reasons sometimes that, and I haven't really had this happen, at least not so far. But I honestly think it's one of the reasons sometimes that you will see when people walk away that there will be acquaintances, friends, and even family members who cut ties with them or distance themselves, which is just the worst because it's not Christ-like in any way. And then those people feel even more shamed and left out in the cold and even more lonely after they've already been going through the anguish and torment and loneliness internally by themselves while they sorted through all this, which none of any of those people in the church have any idea about because they haven't gone through it, you know? And it's disgusting. It's like they do it because they're like, well, I'm not going to see you in heaven anyway. And whether people realize that that's what happens or not, I honestly think that it is one of the reasons that a lot of relationships become strained um, after people leave the church. Some people aren't like that at all in the church. Like they are loving. They really are Christ-like. They really do show forth that love. I do not want to be unfair in any way. And like most of the people that I've known really are like that. There have been some where it's like it's very obvious that it's like, well, I'm just not even going to comment. I'm not going to really talk to you that much anymore. And and it's sad because it's like, well, you know, we used to be friends, like, or we were a lot closer friends before or something. And I'm not saying that about this person. This person I do consider a friend. I still consider them a friend. Um, and I mean, I would be surprised if this person, didn't still consider me a friend, but and I'm not trying to in any way shame them. It's just I don't think that they realize the way their language comes across and how that like it just continues to stab an already wounded person because the way that I feel walking away from the church is I do feel wounded and it's a wound that I've had to basically cut into myself and reopen and re-examine over and over again, and now I'm finally at the point where I'm starting to allow it to heal just a little bit, but it's an incredibly lonely process. And that's not because I made the decision to turn away from Christ. Um, it's not because I made the decision to have a less fulfilling, less Christian centered, less moral life. I made the decision based on my own core personal feelings and beliefs, which when you try to express those feelings and beliefs, it's ironic that so many people in the church will discount them because literally everything that is taught in the church is based on a feeling or belief. That's literally like they don't teach you critical thinking. They just teach you to listen and obey and then echo chamber. And so people echo chamber by sitting in class every Sunday and in sacrament meeting every Sunday and repeating the same messages over and over and over and saying that they know that it's true. And there's nothing different. There's nothing for a church that believes so strongly in personal progress as human beings, which I mean that's correct. We as human beings do have the innate desire and motivation and drive to progress. Yet I don't really feel there's a whole lot of progression there that happens. Because it really is. It's just the same messages in a loop. And then the echo chamber comes in where people are like, I had an experience and this is what I felt. And that totally proves that what you're saying is true. And people are like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. That does prove what we're saying is true. And that's what happens over and over and over. There's no critical thought applied to that. So then when I come in or anybody like me comes in or comes out, I guess, saying, "Hey, I learned this thing about the church that wasn't even anti-doctrine. Polygamy has always been in the history, and I learned it like over half my life ago, or about half my life ago, and it's bothered me for half my life and has tormented me, and I've tried to push it away or forget about it or all the things." It's like, well, that doesn't really matter because you just gave up your salvation. And honestly, like you should have just gotten on board with it. You should have had more faith. The problem's with you. And so it's like this continued like reinforcing behavior of No, you're the problem, not the prophet. It can't ever be the leadership. Also, because we covenanted in the temple to never speak ill of those in charge. Talk about an enormous recipe for disaster and a huge red flag. I will never understand how that escaped me. Although I do have to say, when I first went through the temple and I heard that, I did find that odd, and it did kind of give me a sinking feeling in my stomach, because I remember thinking, like, we're not allowed to say anything bad. Like, what does that even mean? Like, define bad. Like, I disagree with them on something. Like, if I disagree with one of the prophets, like, I'm breaking my covenants. If I say I don't like what they said, or if I say I think that they're wrong, like, I don't, what does that mean? And I feel like that's also a topic that people will in the church will kind of define in their own way, and that's also kind of a danger, because it's like they make it vague enough, like they do with everything else in the gospel library and in the church they give you information on. They make it vague enough so that you will fill in the blanks. That's how it works. So then you fill in the blanks, and that's why you have people in the church who are a lot more stoic, and staunch in their belief, and other people who are a lot more laid back and relaxed about it, and who are like, nah, I think I'm gonna be fine. And I mean, I was getting to that point where I was just like, is every little thing that I do really gonna keep me out of heaven? Like, if I, curse and I say the F word, and like, I don't know. Like, I have a really hard time believing that, like, if someone like Mother Teresa, for instance, who did a lot of wonderful things for people in her life, and lived a life of service and love, that in the next life, if she, said the F word, or, or said some sort of expletive, or, made a bad comment about somebody, that, she's Jesus is going to be like, yeah, you did really, really great. Um, I'm looking at your life right here. Amazing, amazing work. But I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to turn you away because you used some bad words and you said something bad about somebody. And it just seems so extreme when I think about it. And that's why, like, the Mormon idea of repentance, where it's like you're just constantly repenting over every little fucking thing, like, it drives me crazy. And it was destroying my mental health, because I was always on my own back. I was always on my own back about every little thing. And it made me more stressed out, which made my family more stressed out, because I was just like, well, there's something wrong with me and I can't stop and I can't get better. And I was just spiraling. And that was another aspect to it that I couldn't take anymore. And that was really not like one of my main reasons, but it was something that I realized kind of more retrospectively after walking away, that I was like, wow, like, I am so much more relaxed now, and I feel like I can actually breathe, because I don't feel like I have this constant expectation put upon me that I have to constantly be just like keeping track of all these little things that I do that are wrong according to church standards and church policy and church doctrine, or however any of those are distinguished. A lot of them I, at this point, don't even know anymore. The lines are very fine, but I got to a point where I was like, I can't even believe, like, how much stress that was putting on me. And I had been going to church my whole life saying, like, oh, I'm so glad I have the church because of how much better it makes me feel. Well, I didn't know what I was talking about, because I'd never been out of the church before. So I never tried it any other way. And that's the problem that I have with posts like these from people who are lifers like I was, because they literally don't know anything else. You are only speaking to an incredibly biased perspective that you have never checked against anything else. Like, that is something you have to understand. It doesn't matter how many times you say you know something. I can say I know a lot of things and have them not be true, but I might believe the hell out of what I'm saying. Like, that doesn't make something true. It just means that the people surrounding you in your echo chamber are going to say the same exact things. They're just going to continue to reaffirm that and be like, I know it too. And it gives you this satisfaction, it releases some endorphins or dopamine or something that gives you like the satisfaction. Anyway, so when this person states in conclusion, the closer we stay to the gospel and the teachings of Jesus, the richer and more fulfilling our lives become. By embracing love, compassion, forgiveness, service, individuals can cultivate meaningful relationships, experience inner peace, blah, blah, blah. Well, again, he's just reiterating like the same thing over and over between all of these different paragraphs, which is that the gospel is the answer. The Mormon gospel about Jesus Christ is the answer, and there are no other true answers out there. And yeah, again, it's so closed-minded and so closed off to think that you have all of the answers. And as far as experiencing inner peace goes, that wasn't my experience. I have more inner peace now than I did as a member of the Mormon church. Like I can literally say that all day long though, and people will not listen to me. They will not believe me, and they will look at me as somebody who is an empty seat in heaven, who has been so gullible and stupid and ridiculous to be so deceived by the teachings of men and by secularism and by, the adversaries' wiles. Like that is how I'm perceived by people like this. And they will not look at their own comments as being something that puts other people in an other category. Like, I'm the special and I have the truth. And here's what you need to know if you want to be a special too. But the rest of you are all others. I mean, it's offensive. It's like, you honestly think the rest of us out here aren't living as fulfilling and rewarding lives? And it's icky language that they don't realize that they're saying. Somebody I did appreciate at the bottom said, the Mormon church doesn't hold a monopoly for good people, values, and truth. And all I can say is amen to that. No, you do not hold all of the knowledge, all of the values, all of the morals, and all of the happiness. That's literally one of the teachings in the church, is that once you have the truth, if you walk away from it, like all of your sins come back upon you. You will be, you're in a lot of trouble at that point. Like, you're not going to make it to heaven unless you repent and come back to the fold. Because they view themselves as being the people of Jesus Christ. Like, that is his fold. That's his flock. And you just left the flock. So any other church that you go to is not going to be good enough. Any other way that you live your life is not going to be good enough, because you once had the knowledge and then you decided to actively walk away from it. And your reasons are never going to be good enough. You just made up whatever reasons you had to. You came up with whatever excuses you had to. You got offended by something. Frankly, like, and that one I feel like is something that people will use a lot, because it's like, well, look, yeah, you got offended over, the doctrine of polygamy and over the sexism. And it's like, okay, well, there's a difference between being offended over something stupid in the church, like, maybe like the example that's been given in the past by other leaders in the church was that there was some, person in church history where Joseph Smith spelled their name wrong or said their name wrong or something stupid like that, and they left the church over that. I remember actually looking into that one a little bit and hearing that the true story was really not that simplistic. And that's really actually more the thing I was focused on, was that that we just aren't given all the information. We aren't given informed consent. I was raised in the church, but I didn't find out about polygamy until way after I was baptized. It was 9 years after I was baptized into the church, and it was like, I remember thinking like, oh no, like, I'm accountable for all this now and I have to live this in order to be happy. But it took me 18 years to realize that why would I think that this is what my Savior wants for me? Why would I ever think that in order to be happy, I would have to make myself miserable and do something that I feel to my core is fundamentally wrong and abhorrent and evil, because that is how I view so many of the practices that Joseph Smith had. They really were evil, and he took full advantage of his position. And it is no different than what you see with Warren Jeffs, with Rasputin. If you look into some of these cult leaders and people who claimed to be either prophets or like some semblance of the Messiah, they used that for their advantage. They used that to get what they wanted, and people in the church will not see that. They refuse to see that because that is considered anti-Mormon doctrine. And I can't even stress enough how frustrating it is that we, as active lifers and even as active converts in the church, have the audacity. I had the audacity in the past to look at people and not even hear what they were saying. I would listen and not hear what they were saying at all. I was missing the mark. Like Christ says in the New Testament, about like the Pharisees and Sadducees and the people who don't really want to see what he's saying. They miss the mark. You can lay it out in plain English all day long and they will not listen to you because they have to be able to justify that they have the truth. And also what that really comes down to is their own fear that what they've invested in their whole lives and what they've known their whole lives, like what would they do without it? And that's what they don't understand about when people like me do come out and express reasoning and express pain and anguish. I don't think that they understand that that's where it's coming from. It's not coming from a place of, I walked away and now I'm immediately miserable because I walked away from the light. Like, people aren't stupid. Like if you did have something that was making you crazy happy, which is the claim of the church, that it will make you so happy, you're going to go through hard times and trials. They have to cover both sides of the argument on that. They have to cover their bases and make sure that, like, oh, but also if you are in the church, like, you might not be happy sometimes. That's not because you're not, in the right church, or living the right gospel or the truth. Like, it's because the Lord will test you and try you. Like, there's always all of that. But it ultimately, like, it does not matter what you say, because people need to be able to justify that what they have and what they're clinging to so hard because it's all they know. Like, they have to be able to justify that because it's scary without it. It is literally their comfort blanket. And the thing is I can really compare this kind of a relationship, this unhealthy relationship, with blind obedience, um, to an old man who sits at the top of the church and lives a really fucking cushy lifestyle off of the church. I can really attest to the fact that, oh, sorry, kids. But what I was saying was I can really attest to the fact that, like, this is in ways comparable to abusive relationships. And I'm not trying to take that to an extreme, but when you've been raised with a parent who is behaving in a certain way or treating you in a certain way, and you don't really know anything else, you might have some intuition deep down that might nag at you, but that may not come out for quite a while. And especially when you're really small and little and impressionable as a child. And I'm not trying to compare this to like sexual abuse in any way. Like, I would never disrespect anybody who's been through rape or molestation or anything like that. This is not even at the same level. But in the mental and emotional sense, it is similar. And I do feel like I can compare that just from my own personal experience with trauma. It is incredibly, incredibly similar. And it's the reason for that I say that too is because oftentimes people who are emotionally and mentally abusive, like, they will also lie to make sure that you stay compliant. They will lie to make sure that you are obedient to them. And so not only are they requiring that you exercise blind faith in them, but they're also lying. They're also just withholding information so that you only know so much that you think that the blind faith that you have is actually real faith because you're like, oh, these are all good things. And I'm not trying to take anything away from the Mormon church. There are a lot of really beautiful ideas and things there that I am glad that I was raised with. It's just, you really screw yourself over when you're withholding all this fundamental information about what actually happened in history, and how those characters who are supposed to be prophets and in direct communion with God, like, you really screw yourself over with that. And honestly, like, even without knowing all that stuff, I think that I eventually would have come to this conclusion anyway, just because of polygamy. And because of the withholding of the priesthood from blacks, like, it just, that it never made sense to me. I was like, I'm sorry. And the answer is always given, especially with like the withholding of priesthood, which now the answer has changed since I was a kid. But the answer used to be, like, God does things in his own time and he has his own reasons for it. And even when I was very young, I remember my dad telling me that the reason behind that was because they were descendants of Ham and he was cursed with the skin of, or no, he was cursed because he married like an Egyptian who was of color or something. And I was like, I guess I don't understand like why that was bad for him to marry her. Like, I don't get it. And it really just came down to like this color of skin shit where I was like, okay, so that's racism though. I don't like, how else would you spin that? Like, you can't spin it any other way. And then I just remember thinking, well, maybe he was just wrong about his reasoning. And I just remember being told, like, well, God does things in his own time. That was the new message. And now the message that I remember hearing during, like, in between conference sessions was, we don't know why God did that. We just don't even know. And I'm going, it's the same response with, hey, yeah, we don't pray to a heavenly mother and we don't know why. I don't know how much more blind you could be to just listen to that and be like, oh, I'm okay with it. I'm not okay with it. And also, we do know plenty about what happened with polygamy. Although, oh, I have too many things to say about the discrepancies and the withholding of incredibly valuable information in the gospel library about polygamy and the history of the church in general, that I just, that's a whole other video. But they always try to, like I said, they withhold information. They do these mental gymnastics. They allow people to do mental gymnastics and fill in those blanks where they've been purposefully vague and have given just barely an answer or really a lot of non-answers, so that people will just fill that in their minds. And they know that people will do that because um, they don't want to, they're too scared. They're too scared to do anything else. And I used to be that person. And the funny thing is too, is like, this person who wrote this on social media, I mean, I don't know. Maybe this person will be in the church for the rest of their life, because they're that committed. But eventually you might get to a point where some of those things that were nagging at you that weren't as loud or as strong before, they eventually come up to the surface and you can't stop that. And that is also very similar to trauma. Um, and I say this from a perspective of like little t trauma, where when you've been through something like that, you can try to forget or push things down as much as you want. And eventually your mind is going to go full force on you and push it all the way to the surface, and you have to deal with it. You don't really have much of a choice at that point, unless you want to keep fighting it. You're just going to make yourself miserable doing that. But anyway, I think it is interesting. I used to feel like I was as committed as that person. For like most of my life, I felt like that. And so you just never know. You never know when it is or what it is that is going to finally wake you up. And I'm saying this knowing that anybody who watches this who is a committed member, all they're going to hear from me out of that was like, you never know when the adversary is going to strike. You never know when you're going to be weak enough for the adversary to strike and get you out of the church. So anyway, that wasn't my experience. I am a lot happier now. Um, n- Nobody's really going to hear that. But who's a member? But for those who aren't or who have left, I hope you've found validation in anything that I'm saying. I got so much validation from going online through this lonely process, and hearing other people's stories and being able to relate to them. And I wanted to be able to do that for other people because there needs to be a community where people can turn to after walking away from their other community, because that's another painful part. It's like, well, I don't want to leave friends behind, but also I just don't feel you don't feel comfortable there anymore. Um, Even though you maintain connections, you maintain friendships, I still have, people that I know that I see all the time who are, in the church. And I love them. And so I'm not trying to say that once you stop going, that's just creating a division or a separation. It's just, I understand where you're coming from. If when you decide to walk away, you go, well, I'm not going to go back on Sundays either. Most people don't. Some people try to. Some people continue to go every Sunday. I tried that for a little bit. I couldn't handle it. I just couldn't handle it. So, and it wasn't because of the membership, it's because of what everyone believes without knowing the truth. So anyway, this was a really long video. If you made it through, good for you. But thank you for tuning in, and I hope you return for the next thought that I have, and hopefully I'll make it a hell of a lot more succinct and short. Anyway, thanks for watching. It's been unsilent, and I want it to stay that way. Have a good